echo the comments about tech. Oh, no problem. Yeah, would just be to echo the comments around technology. We're working obviously on change management software and portfolio software. The big thing that I see as having happened is really the recognition that we need to make sure that we have some sort of digital ecosystem for all of our change management data. And I think that's really just the last couple of years as opposed to the last 3 to 5 years, and being able to put into place smart analytics to help us to understand what's going on, but also to understand just how effective our intervention plans are, and where we'll be taking that next would be really interesting. But yeah, it's just around for me, just the additional piece would be just around the technology.
Thanks, Gavin. How about Vijay?
The biggest change what I see happening outside is before even we look outside, it is a space between our 2 ears, the shifting mindset. I think that is the first step there. For the past 20, or I should say 15 years, the change has not been episodic, and yet we treat change management as episodic events. You wait and we followed the traditional project management methodology. However, now we are evolving and continuously changing and evolving. This is where the old models do not serve any longer the purpose. They serve purpose in a traditional Tayloristic principles and command and control. Now, those same models are introducing fragility into the change. They become brittle. Now we have to bring in the concept of agility, adaptive systems, especially we're dealing with complexity.
Thank you, Vijay. Brian, do you have anything you want to add to this?
I don't think so at this point. Thank you.
Okay. I'd just like to jump in and say one of the other changes that I think is happening is in the skill set area. And this is around introducing coaching and change management, which I know Francis can speak more about. But really, the requirements of the change management professional are going to be changing pretty significantly over the next 2 to 3 years, where there's already positions being created, even in our federal government, where to get the senior roles, you basically have to be certified by ICF as well as ACMP with a CCMP. So I think that's really important to talk about. We can go into more detail where we can pick Francis's brain a little bit more on that. So how about anyone in the audience? Any other changes that you think we're gonna see in the next 3 to 5 years? And just open up your mic and jump in.
Morning, Teresa. It's Tricia Stiggy. I think that the idea of understanding some of the, well, I'll kind of build on AJ's around the neuroscience, particularly some of the life experiences that occur for people that impact people's ability to really navigate and lead through change. So I think we're going to be seeing a little bit more of a role, a personal opinion that will become a little bit more needing as change management people to understand more of the psyche of folks.
Right. If I remember, Tricia, you are building a practice around trauma and change management. So how does that fit into what you just said?
Well, yes, it is. I'm actually building this just kind of new because the word trauma still kind of puts people a little bit on edge. So I think it will become more common in the nomenclature and the way we talk in organizations in the next 2 or 3 years. Right now, I'm approaching it from the neuroinformed piece where how the brain reacts. And then I come in the back door with saying, the experiences that you've had. We all see change through the experiences we've had. And if you've had a family of origin that comes from a pretty crazy background, it's going to influence your ability to really see and adopt change.
Okay, great.
So
thank you. Anybody else? Any other thoughts about what's coming down the pipe? Okay, one other thing I've noticed, and this was actually raised by one of our panelists at our Lead Change conference, was Linda Hoops, was there's more of a focus on peer-to-peer dialogues. And I'm not sure if that's as a result of, you know, the meetings that we have virtually, or a change in the way work is done. But there's more peer-to-peer dialogues, which I find to be pretty interesting, because in the methodologies that we traditionally use, there's been like the change agents or the change partners, and they kind of serve that joint communication change agent role. And it seems to me like there's going to be more conversations between stakeholders themselves. So that's just something that I wanted to bring forward in here. Okay, any other questions from the audience? Anything you want to ask before I go into one of my other planned questions?
If you don't mind, I have a question here, Roberto from Mexico. Nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you.
Nice.
In regards to the upcoming releases for technology, I mean, since the first announcement from Facebook to get into the metaverse, getting some avatars related to communicate with each other, and now most recently, the Teams application for Microsoft is planning to release a second version by saying kind of an avatar of yourself by interacting with others. And that is not giving us only the approach that we're having right now with the cameras on or see each other's faces, but when you have a communication one single person of a group of persons, you can see all the different reactions, postures, attitudes. But now that we're moving to a more interactive and metaverse, how is the thinking about how can we measure, how can we approach to each other if we're not seeing really each other, you know? What are the thoughts around it?
Yeah.
I see.
Go
We
ahead,
all had
Dana.
our hands. We all had, it's so
You
funny.
did.
I just got out of a coaching session with one piece that I can bring to it, and then I'll turn it over. I just left an executive who during a change management workshop had camera off. Now, this was an executive who, as a sponsor, announced, hey, this is important. You guys need to be here and participate in all the normal stuff that an executive's supposed to do instead of launch and learn and be active and visible. However, with the camera off and them not engaging in questions, that's the virtual version of launch and learn. That's the virtual version of not being active and visible. So something as subtle, it would be like them handling, I had to give analogies. They never even thought about that. Even something as subtle as handling your email when you're in a meeting, right? You wouldn't, of course, do that if you're in a meeting anymore. Well, what are we doing when we have cameras off and typing away during a virtual session? So it's bringing that gentle, subtle awareness to the virtual meetings and how to up that I think is powerful.
Great. Thanks, Dana. Gavin, how about you?
Gosh, yeah, I mean, I got to admit, and I'll be very brief. My new conception of organizations is not beautiful glass and steel buildings, but it's basically just disembodied brains floating around in space. It's just how I imagine organizations now. There's just this informal linking of minds all around the world. You can imagine, you know, we're just trying to influence the delicate neurochemistry and make sure we don't get anyone into a amygdala hijack by announcements that we're making. So, you know, as long as we're being delicate, just as Dana was saying there, and we're being thoughtful, then yeah, I mean, it's going to be okay. We're going to be all right.
Great.
Yeah,
PJ.
Gavin,
Oh, go ahead.
Hi, Francis.
yeah, so to pull that thread, Gavin, that way that I'm thinking about organizations now is how individualization more than a common experience is really what is driving things. So when we had an office, there was the opportunity, there was a platform of a common experience of going in and having some kind of sense of belonging. And now with COVID and working from home, that's not there. And so we then backtrack and lose a sense of identity and purpose. But, more than that, it's that individuals really are walking through the same pandemic, but having very, very different experiences, widely varied. The impact on their families, their health, their finances, even in our global companies where homes in other parts of the world are shared by 3 generations, there's no opportunity to have a private workspace. So the stressors are very, very different. And so I think the impact on change management is to think about then how do we connect and build the ways to engage and connect with employees on an individual basis, because our stakeholder groups, as they were defined before, they're not necessarily holding water.
Great point. PJ, go ahead.
The way I see it, there are a couple of things Alberto mentioned, and it is about mesh networks, and those are technology is just a noise the way I see it. Technology is an enabler which brings everybody together, just like right now we all are together, wherever we are. But what it is about the change itself is how we approach change. How do we build anti-fragility into the business processes? Because change will happen, things will break, and pandemic has done that. So incorporating anti-fragility within your day-to-day work, even at an individual level, and that is the key thing. So when you talk about integrative approach to change management, it is just not the typical change management. We are done with mass production mentality. Now we are talking building on Francis, what you just said earlier, Francis, was about experience. We are moving into what we call it as an experience economy. We started that journey in about 15 years back. Now we are actually living that. What does that mean? How do we bring change? Stakeholders, what we defined in a typical stakeholder impact assessment and change management is itself has gone. In fact, I even, and this is a bit controversial for because the word change management is an old, outdated phrase. Move it, call it yourself change practitioners. Management is all about command control. Come on, you don't have control over anything. So call yourself a change practitioner, not a management anymore.
I'd like to pick up, Terry, for just a moment on what Francis and BJ,
Sure.
BJ are talking about. When you look at the factors driving the Great Resolution, one of them is very much about the personal experience, the personal alignment of purpose with what my employer is expecting of me. And so again, that's an important signal, I think, for all of us as change practitioners, that seeing stakeholders in bundles of 50 and 500 and 5,000 is invalid to how people are experiencing their organizational lives at this point.
Great. So you guys are all going to make me rebrand the company. I can feel it. Okay, I'll take that into advisement. Thank you. So great. One of the things that we also were interested in, I want to come back to Francis with the coaching a bit. Can you tell us what's going on with ACMP and ICF and how you see it impacting the future of our roles?
Sure. So ACMP and ICF have created a task force to really look at how to bring these two practices together in a change initiative in order to be more impactful. Mm-hmm. So there are different ways of bringing in coaching. We can bring in the certified coach. We can train leaders and others on the coach approach, which really is a building in kind of, we call it little C coaching, as opposed to big C coaching where you have somebody who's certified. And the reason why that's different or important is that the practices themselves are, in my opinion, fundamentally different. Mm-hmm. I thought as a change practitioner, when I signed up for my year-long coach training, I thought, oh, this is going to be a piece of cake. I already do that. I don't. I did consulting because coaching is about not being an expert in any subject matter, except to help prompt the client to come up with new ideas and have a change of perspective. And change management, as we know, it's very prescriptive.
Mhm.
So how do we bring these two professions together in ways that respect the standard, the professional practice standards, certification and code of ethics of each practice that's different? And I'm going to put in the chat actually a call out to Teresa and Brian. There's a great article about their perspective on bringing these two together, which I think is really, thought leadership and foundational. So at the same time, given what we talked about in terms of individualization and how do we reach employees, then it kind of calls on people in the organization to engage differently with employees. So bring in some coaching skills to them in order to give them a new way of engaging with employees. It feels like the employee is, they're understood. So the coach approach is what we call that, if you're not a certified coach, and helping managers because they have the last mile, right, of engaging with employees, and leaders, teaching them how to ask more than tell.
Mm-hmm.
Then creates the experience of the employees being heard and engaged, which then, ties together some of the things that we've been talking about. So in the middle of 2022, we expect to have a white paper that explains a point of view, a specific point of view, and recommendations. So stay tuned.
Great, thank you.
Tricia has her hand up.
Okay, thank you. Tricia.
I'm guilty of not being on video. I'm sorry. Francis, I just wanted to ask you, how is the coaching conversation here or concepts going to be different than what we are traditionally working with leaders to teach them about coaching? Or are they going to be fairly much the same? Does that question make sense, what I'm asking?
So I don't know your framework around how we currently work with.
Well, I mean, we talk a lot with in leadership development about being a coach. And I think you're talking about a further depth around coaching here, maybe. I'm just trying to understand how it's going to be any different than what we've been advising and helping leaders be a coach all along.
Without seeing the framework, I'm expecting it's probably complementary.
Okay.
Right. So it's not like there's going to be a defined new coach approach. It's more like a category of the way that a leader would engage with someone or a manager that has that coach feel where it's not directive, it's not prescriptive. They're asking more questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So so if that makes sense, I think that all of that's going to fit into this category called coach approach with what already exists.
Brian and I teach a class of coaching skills for change professionals. And one of the distinctions we make between the two is that coaching is when you are asking the questions, to Francis's point, and you're the onus is on the client to answer them. Whereas consulting is where you're providing expertise. And so you're going in with your traditional deck and making recommendations and working through solutions. And the difference from our perspective is that when you use coaching in conjunction with the consulting, it helps with the integration of the information that somebody, in the understanding that somebody's having. And when you use coaching skills with your sponsors, it gets them to be more accountable for the areas that they, need to act on. So instead of going in with your one pager, here are the behaviors that you need to follow as a sponsor, we're going in and saying, how do you lead change in this organization? what is your leadership style? What do people think about you? What do you know about yourself? And you start really kind of making it a little more personal, so that when you get to the point of them taking action, they're self-generating what the action should be. So
Barry,
great.
if I can, I'm sorry, if I
Brian?
can jump in with a quick example, going back to Dana's illustration or case with the sponsor being off camera. As a change practitioner, we might come back and say, when you're off camera, people aren't really believing you as much. They can't see you. They can't feel the passion behind what you're saying. So that might be our approach. From a coach approach, we might say instead, I noticed that you were off camera on this announcement. When you have been in meetings with others who make important announcements off camera, and they're off camera, what has your response been? So it's a very different way of helping, whether it's the CEO or the front line or anything in between, learn and grow in their role as in the change process.
Excellent analogy.
Great. I'm going to ask the audience, do you have any questions? Doesn't have to be on this topic. We can shift.
I do. This is Vicki.
Hi, Vicki.
Hi. My question is that I'm in an environment that we're doing a ton of change management at the same time, 22 projects at the same time. And so what some of the leaders in the group have done is they've done everything to establish a way to quantify those changes so that they can say, this will take this long, it'll take this much work, it'll be this hard, we're managing it, and to come back with an ROI, of course, for that investment in those changes to also give some substance to all the work. The problem is, I feel like, and I think that Vijay touched on it some, I feel like they're factoring out people so much that it's becoming so structured that people are lost in the mix. And how do you get to the middle balance with that? Because it was somewhat like what you've talked about before, where it was just sort of this art, and you kind of built your own way to do it. And now it's become such a science, at least in our organization. And how do we get that balance, especially Gavin, using tools like you're introducing, because that provides a way to really substantiate and quantify everything. So it feels like the structure, it feels like all of the undergirding and it's been formatted with a form for everything and a way to explain everything and house everything has lost the people in the midst of what the work is supposed to be about.
Gavin, do you want to address that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, we're building Change Plan, which is a digital platform to enable organizations that have large portfolios of change, just like you're dealing with. There's a couple of things, though. The great thing about artisanal products is that they're unique and they're delicious and they're sort of one-off. But, we can't serve everyone unpasteurized milk. We can't scale that. So we need to have systems that allow you to dive in to recognize what's going on for the individual, but also be able to pull back out and look at what's going on a macro level. So it's the ability to zoom in and out, like to zoom in, see what's going on for the individual, but also be able to pull back out effortlessly. That's one of our guiding principles of what we're trying to build. So it's not just science and structure, but it's a system that supports you to be able to still recognize the overall trends that are going on across your portfolios of change. Just the other piece would be, I think, the importance of building institutional memory for how successful changes have been in the past. So if you're trying to figure out what the impact of change is likely to be or how long it's going to take, as you build memory over periods of time, you're able to look backwards And typically organizations don't have an easy way to look at their back catalog, see what worked, see what didn't work. And that's why we need systems to do that. Again, we've got to recognize that, of course, it's all about those floating brains, as we were talking about, the critical importance of the individual.
Thank you. BJ, what do you think?
So, Gavin, I like where your approach and the way you're thinking about this. What I would like to compliment that is, as much as it is science, and I completely love tools. However, we cannot use the tools to use as a crutches, which is what we have done in the past, to literally build this practice. And again, that is the world where we could actually control things. Now I look at change practitioners more like a gardener. You have the science, you need the art of how do we cultivate things and let go of the past. Let's not get burdened by the institutional history and past experiences, because you cannot step into the same river twice.
Interesting.
So yes, what worked for change about 5 years back is not going to work for today. Is absolutely will not work. And I've seen time and again, whenever we have gone back to looking at past history, and they say, wait a minute, those people didn't even exist. And those systems don't exist. And we have retired those systems, especially if you're talking about an IT, or that is one aspect of it. So one of the things what I found it very useful, and it is a very old tool called network analysis. What it tells you is actually to change to occur or influence change, it's only about 2.8% of the people in any organization who actually make the change, not the leaders. And I think Innovisor is a Dutch company, which they use this tool to do the analysis before actually change, they bring in a change. And it is really bringing that aspect is there. And on top of that, if you build with neuroscience, neurobehaviorism, neuroimaging, it brings in now today we have a great opportunity to do that. We have to pivot forward, like using metaverse, mesh networks, reading people's emotions. It is going to be, like it or not, we have to think something 10 years from now ahead. Think yourself as 2050 and look back in 2030 and beyond. So you have to position yourself in that world. You need to have an exponential thinking and exponential transformation in change management. I use the word change management, but change practitioner is absolutely essential. And we need to move away. I keep on saying this because management is all like command and control. It's so old school. Anyways, I'll get off my soapbox.
Teresa,
Thank
if I
you.
can add.
Tina, do you have anything?
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. As was just illustrated, organizations, as we know, are composed of people and their agreements, right? It's their thoughts and it's their actions that shape it, period. So it's impossible for our profession to ever leave people behind, right? It's our profession that specializes in how to help people, and we can't take people out of change. There's no change then. So a simpler model or framework doesn't mean a simpler transformation. For me, in order to stop the box checking and the comfortable PowerPoints that we've fallen into in the past, requires enough sufficient resources to get one-on-one, right? The time and the resources, which means the executives who are potentially still into box checking and command and control, and that's their universe, we have to meet them where they're at and take them to where they want to go. That's their change journey. We know where we should, right? We know how personal this should be to help our humans move in that direction. But to meet them where they're at requires us to speak their language. You know, who was it? I think Miss Pike is actually on this call. She's the one that illustrated in some of her work on irrational change. She talks through the FBI negotiation tactics. And feel free, Ed, to jump in here, whereby they're taught to run with the horse before they can change the direction. The same thing with executives.
Mm-hmm.
So the tools that Gavin mentions, the things that we're doing right now is to speak their language in order to run with the horse to change the direction.
Great.
You got it, Dana, spot on. And actually one of the things that we're finding is, this may help, is that there's just generally, we go into the world of change thinking, and it sort of probably builds a little bit on the scale of what's happening and what Vijay just said. We go into this with one assumption, which is that we're all cognitively overloaded. So therefore we're all making poor choices. We are probably, most of us, emotionally intelligent, emotionally, intellectually, or physically depleted. So none of us are really making great choices in the world that we're in, whether we're practitioners or we are targets of that change. Now, if you go in with that assumption, and this is something that was taught to me 20 years ago, you start to say, actually, how can I do exactly what Donna's described? To pull against someone, pull against their belief system, what they think is true, or what their priorities are, can be very, very, very hard. Yeah. To Gavin's point, you made a great point earlier, Gavin, about staying underneath that amygdala hijack. You know, and actually we would probably advocate, or I would advocate, my practice is if we can avoid triggering it, that's better than triggering it, because once you've triggered it, you've become a threat. And once you've become a threat, that's a really hard place to walk back from. So actually asking questions, that just pure skill of asking questions, which plays back to your point, Francis, about coaching and applying a coach approach. Asking questions, creating that self-awareness means you can understand that individual perception, the reason is why they believe what they do. Only when you know that can you start to change it. Yeah, we make some very dangerous assumptions at the moment, and I'll stop there. But thank you, Dana.
You bet.
Thanks, Ed. Francis, do you have anything to build on that? Or did we cover it all?
Yeah. There's a different thread I wanted to pull that's related, and that is, you know, how do we really understand what is important to employees now that they have their individual experiences? What's their particular amygdala hijack? So I thought about an important resource that we already have on hand as a model, and that's millennials. So I don't know how anybody else feels about it, but millennials, they have a lot of, they're very, their self-image is very individualized. They have very strong expectations of being treated in a unique manner, and that they're the largest portion of our workforce, and they're growing. But more than that, I think, how do we leverage our understanding about how to work with millennials in order to get closer to each person's individual needs? And so that's the point, really, is, think about the ways that we're adapting to engage differently to meet the millennials where they're at, because they're not necessarily on board. They question everything. And how do we, so thinking about how we do that with them at this point with COVID and the shattering of the sense of identity with the rest of the employees, bring that forward, because they have a lot that they can teach us.
Great.
Turi, if I can jump in on that, Francis, you are so on point there. For everyone, there is a great Gallup study on how millennials want to work and live that really provides some tremendous insights. And as somebody who has been involved in the future of work and so forth for years, what we are hearing as a growing voice, not just from millennials, but across the generations, is exactly what we've been hearing from millennials for years.
If I may.
Sure.
So here's the thing. Let's zoom back for a minute. I'm going to take you back, agricultural revolution. Work was everything. When people shifted from agricultural revolution to industrial revolution, the work was everything, boss was the god, and that is all about survival. People were moving there. Then came the information age, where everybody in our generation and our previous generation, it was all about status. So what happened in that during this period is we pushed everything to the fringes of weekends, and we made work as our primary focus because we wanted to build status as a society, or even as individuals too. Today, or in the last 15 years or so, there has been a slight shift, very slow but slight shift. We are moving towards a society much more thinking in a broader terms. This is where the millennials are coming. Millennials, they didn't have to worry about survival. They don't care about your status. Okay. It is that crazy CEOs of big banks, and I'm saying this very loudly there because they're the ones who want people to come back to work. Otherwise, I'll fire you. Who said that? And guess what? Like again, day before yesterday, he retracted his words. Come on, what kind of mentality is that? What kind of, and millennials, if you're talking about them and the societal thing, they're going to ask you, you know what? My parents woke me up at 6:37 in the morning, threw me out in some daycare and rushed to some work. I don't want to give that experience to my children. See you later. Work comes to me. I will find work somewhere else. Why should think about that kind of implications from a change management point of view, from an overall transformation of society? That is what is happening right now. And we cannot continue to operate in the same models what worked in the morning of our lives. It will not work in the afternoon or the evening of our lives.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone have any ideas around how we would actually realize change management in context of what Vijay just said? What would be different?
I'm going to jump in real quickly on that, Terry. The first thing that is different is not how important the immediate supervisor is, because that has always been there. And we need to become much more effective in helping them fulfill that role.
Okay, say a little more about that, Brian, fulfilling the role.
In coming out of the world of crisis communications first, the voice most trusted is that of the immediate supervisor. Anytime that we are introducing change to the organization, that is the voice. You know, if the CFO says, we will do this change, and I'm working in procurement and the head of procurement says, just keep on doing what you're doing, whose voice do I listen to? We have not done, maybe we have, quote, educated through training, sponsors at different levels of the organization. But the supervisors are not playing the role. The immediate supervisors are not playing the role that they should be. Picking up on something else Vijay said earlier, really paying attention to who are the true influencers in this organization. Because again, it is not, influence doesn't fall through the chain of command, if you will. There's a whole other network of influence in the organization, and we as practitioners need to tune into that. Again, and Terry, you brought this up earlier from Linda on her panel, the whole peer-to-peer communication. We need to really begin to understand that and leverage that as well. So those are just some of the things.
Teresa, playing on Brian's roles point there, because that's key to culture shifting, which is part and parcel to our their roles. How they are playing out their roles right now is how they have learned to play out their roles and been validated and celebrated to wear their role. Therefore, if you have management that is operating a certain way and now they need to think more like change how the journey goes, as a, they all want the same destination, but the journey needs to shift for millennials or different folks than what has been being done a year ago or even 2 years ago. It is a matter of getting them down to an understanding through what it's precisely have they done within that role that now needs to change for them. I guess it's a combination of both role definition and what we've been talking about with coaching, right? The good, really well-worded questions that get them to see that how they have been wearing their role, that even though it may have been very successful for them for the last 20 years, is not necessarily how they're going to be successful moving into the future because of this rapid, jagged change in viewpoint away from work as a priority.
Thanks, Dana. Any comments from the audience?
Well, it's Tricia. You know, I can't keep my mouth shut. I wanted to build off of Dana because I was having this visceral reaction. I totally agree, but they can't be continued to be rewarded for the way that they have behaved. So I have a client right now. It was clear he was up for a leadership role. Through some work we did, some things came up around his how he's perceived in the organization. He's kind of a bully. And of course, we dug down a little bit and I discovered some of why, but he has been promoted to a very high role, even in spite of his behavior. And so is he taking action to go to executive coaching and all the things that need to do? No, because he's been promoted. So somehow the message has been, yeah, well, we know he's a bully and people don't trust him, but we think he's good enough. So that's where I'm kind of like totally agree with you, Dana. And I get, have so much reaction when they continue to be rewarded for old behaviors that are not going to help.
Great. Okay, why don't we shift direction to another topic? Any questions from the audience? Any aspect of the future of change management that you're curious about?
So can I ask one, Teresa?
Hi.
So one of the things that I see a lot about at the moment is the interdisciplinary, I'm probably going to say it wrong, research, which is where instead of just looking at our own narrow sort of silo of what we know and what we believe to be true, we start to sort of look for inspiration in places outside. It's almost like the problem may have been solved in another field. So the question I would like to ask each of the panel is, what outside of our traditional scope, remit, normal sort of things is inspiring you, and in what way?
Great question.
Well,
Dana?
I have some.
Oh, PJ.
Okay. So, Tricia, absolutely brilliant question. I'm really passionate about this because this is where integrative thinking comes into picture. So, everybody has seen a wine glass, right? And this is an analogy I like to give is base is what keeps the wine glass strong and holds, and when you keep it on the table, it's straight. And what happens is all different knowledges are coming, that forms your basic knowledge. And then we specialize project management, change management, whatever. We become so narrow and that is the stem of the glass. But very few of us actually open up and become the chalice to hold the wine. And in this situation, I call it as consilience, which is Edward Wilson's, was a biologist and biologist. So that is the unity of knowledge is what is missing. Everybody has created the silos or the stems and they're stuck in that. And they're not willing to, because the whole old paradigm is, I know the best. I'm the knower of everything. If we shift from know-it-all mentality to learn-it-all mentality, that is where the integrative thinking comes into picture. And that is what Edwina, you're speaking about. We have to become that chalice, get over ourselves, our own narrow discipline, and think we are the best things in sliced bread. And how do we bring integrative thinking into our approach and how we work together? Its 5 fingers are, if we were equal, we would not have evolved from apes. We would have still been apes.
Thank you. Anyone else on the panel want to contribute?
There's no doubt that change management as a discipline is an interdisciplinary smorgasbord across the boards between neuroscience, business acumen, it goes on and on, sociology, psychology, right? We have pulled from just about every engineering, physics, right? Removing a friction. It's across the boards. I think if we fundamentally keep in mind that it's about this person making a moment of decision to opt in, learning how to do it, and then performing it, fundamentally, that's what change management's all about. The individual, what is it going to take to help that individual arrive there? If we keep our eye on the prize, we can adjust how much of a methodology we use or don't use, right? I think somebody said here, and maybe it was Linda, right, who said in the last one, a simpler model doesn't mean a simpler transformation. Right? It's as simple as that. So let's get off of that. It helps with training newbies. It helps when they don't know pieces of each of those disciplines. But fundamentally, it may just take a discussion and boom, that person's done. We're done, right? That may be all that's needed. So I think it's pivoting based off of what's in front of us. So we're observing what's in front of us constantly. It's not what was last week. It wasn't even what was 6 months ago. Mm-hmm. Right now, it's what's happening right now with the folks in front of us that we're responsible to help through change.
Great.
Hey, Teresa, this is Baron. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Hey, I just wanted to respond real quickly, and I actually am off camera because I want to make sure that I follow this in an appropriate analogy.
No worries.
On the research question, it's sort of where else are we looking to learn? In a very obscure fashion, I don't disagree with VJ about the wine glass, since I am a wine aficionado, but one that I thought about a lot over the summertime as I observed this in my yard is how landscapers work. And when I think about how you look at best practices in landscaping, you think about things like pruning and mowing and fertilizing and seasonal planting and debris and mulching and the proper equipment. And I share all of those because I can make an analogy for each of these sort of pathways that a pruning practice, a fertilizer practice, a seasonal planting practice, et cetera, can play out in the context of being a change practitioner. Not all of them happen simultaneously, nor should they. You certainly need the proper equipment to engage them. Sometimes there will be debris that just has to be ridden, and you're going to have to come back seasonally to do some redos. So I like to look at the sort of landscaping best practices as an orientation to how I think about the practice of change.
Very nice. Thanks for that.
Byron, you spoke to my background is in forestry and agriculture. So I've lived through that. I worked with tigers and elephants, and I moved to telecommunications, and now I'm in finance industry. And there is a consilience. And that is where the change happens. At the heart of the change is the individual. And I think Dana said it brilliantly. It is address at that moment and then let go. If you want to learn something, you have to empty yourself first. Thank you.
Great. Awesome. I'd like to just come back to the skill thing again, because there was one other idea that came in actually on our questions. And it was about, what skills are we going to need in the future? And one of the trends I've been seeing is that we need to bring in more organizational development skills, because these methodologies have been good in pretty much codifying about 60% of what we do. But what they don't do is they don't talk about how to facilitate strategic change or a transformation. And to do that, you need some organizational development consulting skills. So that's part of the advice that I usually give people who are, certified in the practice, and they have maybe 3 years of experience. But what I'm noticing is to actually be a full practitioner, you need to be a consultant. You need to be a management consultant. You can't just go in with this technical approach. So anyway, I just thought I would add that since we're about out of time. But I'd like to thank our panel, and I'd like to thank the participants. And this is something that we're going to be doing quite often at Change Management Review. We've shifted our strategy from webinars where we talk at people to panels. So we'll have a couple webinars, but we're going to really focus on panels. So there's a place to go for advanced practitioners to have conversations like this. So thank you very much. Really appreciate your time, and hope this was valuable for you. Take care.